All right, welcome everyone who's coming in. We're going to turn it right over to Team Supernova, who has planned this event, and they'll be the ones running the show, and they'll be the ones asking the questions and everything. And if anybody wants to put questions in the Q&A box for the panelists as well, you're welcome to do that. And I'm going to turn it over to our students.
Welcome to the 2021 Dwight Englewood Middle School Robotics Experts webinar. Today, you will have the opportunity to hear from experts about topics related to this year's first LEGO League Challenge Cargo Connect season.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we begin our expert webinar, first we would like to introduce FLL team 51389, Supernova. We were a rookie team last year, and now we are all seventh graders. Members are Jason Lee, Andre Valencia, Sylvie Yao, Philip Levinsky, Max Goyal, Gabe Perez, Leo Gu, and myself, Samantha Malamy. Also, we are grateful to have our robotics coaches, Miss Colleen Larinoff and Dr. Jerome Kemper, here today to support us.
We would like to thank Montclair Society of Engineers for helping us secure panelists for this webinar. Last but not least, we would like to thank all panelists who are here today to share valuable knowledge with us. My name is Jason, and I'm the captain of Dwight Englewood Robotics Team Supernova. Last year, the pandemic hit all our robotics teams hard. Some of the members had to quarantine, and we had to meet virtually most of the time. However, we encouraged each other and didn't give up, and each of our 4 school teams got awards. But what was better than awards was that we got to help others while doing our innovation project.
Our innovation project last year was a bike stand that you could attach to your own bike so that you could exercise indoors. We made a real-life model and donated it to a boy named Cole who's fighting cancer. When we got the bike stand, we were so happy to see him smiling. This year, when we found out that the theme for the season was Cargo Connect, our team was really excited. As you all know, transportation and shipping has become an important part of our lives in the past year, especially when we all had to stay home and order lots of things.
We are here today to hear from experts in the world of transportation and cargo. We are glad to share this opportunity to learn from these experts with other FLL teams. Innovation, inclusion, discovery, teamwork, impact, and fun are FLL's core values. These core values have brought us all together to hear from our panel of experts today.
The format of the event will be as follows. First, each speaker will introduce themselves briefly about the work that they have been doing. Then there will be a Q&A session with all the panelists. You may put your questions in the chat, and we will share the questions with the panelists after we go through the questions we received in advance.
You will first hear from Tony Rainey, who is a retired truck driver. Next, you will hear from James Hobbin, who is a food manufacturing engineer. Then we will hear from Mr. Richard Coppola, a warehouse inventory software developer. Then we will hear from Mr. Sean Hahn, an automobile designer who will talk about automobile design and strategy.
Then we'll hear from Tim Dewar, Pepperidge Farm shipping and inventory manager. Then Carl Zimmer, railroad and transportation and shipping transportation expert. Then we will hear from Michael Perrin, who is a driver, and then we'll end with a pre-recorded video with Ms. Kate Burson, former business development in Tesla, focusing on energy policy.
We now invite you to enjoy our expert webinar as we begin to introduce each of our speakers. Max will introduce our first speaker.
Okay, our first speaker is Michael Burnham, a gear and bearings technical expert at Ford Research. Mr. Burnham, can you please share some of your knowledge from Ford Research?
Sure. Thanks, everybody, for inviting me. Thanks for putting this together. This is pretty good and interesting, and I'm sure I'll learn from the audience here. And my hat's off to you students. You're setting off this panel and presentation quite well, better than a lot of ones I've attended. So my name is Mike Rahan. I am what's called a technical expert. Basically a managerial research engineer at Ford Research, Ford Motor Company out in Detroit. If my voice doesn't give it away, obviously I'm from the New York metro area originally, of course. So in the transportation realm, Ford Motor Company obviously does cars and trucks, SUVs and so forth. Mostly what we call passenger vehicles versus those big old commercial trucks you see shipping things everywhere. But basically it's the same thing, right? You have something that is carrying people and or cargo. And the things one does as an engineer in the transportation sectors carries over pretty closely, whether you're designing the kind of trains and buses that we're used to in New York and New Jersey and other places in the country, right? But it's also a lot similar to the things you learn as a student and start working on if you go into aircraft companies. So if you're building planes or helicopters, if you're building trains, if you're building trucks, small trucks, small cars, large cars, there's a lot of similar things. You need to make things reliable. You need to, particularly in transportation, when companies are paying a lot of money for fuel to get from one place to another hundreds of times a day, or for you, when your parents or when you grow up and you drive, you want to make sure you're not spending so much on fuel. You have to make things very, very efficient, whether you're burning gasoline or whether it's an electric vehicle or this name you hear called a hybrid, which is a little bit of both. So basically what I do is I help design the parts that goes in the electric drives for electric vehicles, the transmissions and engines that go in a regular gas-powered vehicle. And the transmission, if you don't know, is a thing when your parents or you go forward or reverse, that kind of thing in a car. And it's fun work. And some of the other people here some of the other professionals here would have done a lot of things that I've done. But from a student standpoint, I just want to let you know that a lot of the things that one does in this whole STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math, you hear a lot about, and the other professionals on this call can speak to you about. You have to learn a lot in school, but it's basically a lot of things you learn through high school, a lot of just basic geometry and algebra and very basic chemical stuff are the things you spend much of your career working on. And when you're sitting in class and thinking, why do I need to know this algebra? Why do I need to learn the quadratic equation? Because you'll be like me or somebody else and spend 20, 30, 35, 40 years doing that stuff. Sometimes it'll be real hard, but you can look out the window or look down the street or look on the railways or look in the airports and see things that you worked on that help get cargo and people and medicines and all kinds of things from A to B. And it's basically just an extension of the stuff you're learning in your high school and such. So that's, I guess, if I have to give the intro, that's kind of the intro I give for a lot of school things. So I will pass the microphone on to whichever of these fine professionals is next.
Thank you, Mr. Burham. Now we're going to move on to our next speaker.
Next, you will hear from James Hobbin, is a food manufacturing engineer. Mr. Hobbin, could you please share some of your experience in food manufacturing?
Thank you for having me this evening. This is a great thing for the kids to get started with for their FLL projects. Hope we can inspire you. I work as an industrial engineer in the food business and manufacturing the food and packaging. My last job I've been working on for the past several months has been making mayonnaise. And it's very simple for you to make mayonnaise or a loaf of bread or a donut in your house one at a time. It's completely different when you then try to take and make that at mayonnaise at 30 gallons a minute all day long and get that into bottles and boxes and pallets and out the door. We've experienced a lot of different things with this pandemic in the supply chain, which is sort of what this is all about, this Cargo Connect. And how do you keep the manufacturing moving and continue to manufacture on a daily basis without the truck drivers delivering on time and without the trains delivering on time and all the shortages we're having. It's been a very enlightening past couple of months. But maybe you kids can solve all these problems for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Hoban, for that introduction about what you do.
You're quite welcome.
Next you'll be hearing from Mr. Richard Coppola, warehousing inventory software developer. Mr. Coppola, can you please share your experience as a software developer?
Sure. So I've been developing software for about 45 years, and it was kind of at random that I got into warehousing just through some early jobs. But I've been working with products ranging from neckties, a lot of different apparel, to food as well. I worked for a company that shipped candy, and almost exclusively candy, and Altoids, and you could smell that the minute you walked into the warehouse. You knew that it was filled with Altoids. But most of the things I do are actually very similar to some of the things Michael had mentioned when you're going down a list of trying to make things reliable and efficient. The number one thing in a warehouse, especially if you're tracking food, is to be very accurate in how you handle everything, because heaven forbid there's a recall, you have to find exactly what lot of what product went to what place on what date so that you can get it all back. So there's a very high degree of control required. But again, as we all, the panelists probably are all facing, efficiency is also really important. We've seen a big change over the past 5-10 years where we've gone from shipping large quantities of any given item to shipping onesies and twosies. Just like if you order something, you're probably not ordering 100 of the same item. You're probably not ordering 200 of the same item. So now orders are becoming all individualized, and trying to manage picking thousands of orders for thousands of people that are all different items, and maybe, there's only one of each item in that whole group, is a very large challenge. And making that efficient and making it controlled, and obviously the next step is automated, is mostly what I work on. So it's making sure we don't lose the items, but also making sure we can get them to the right place, to the right person, in the right size box, in a very efficient manner that unfortunately goes against one of your big constructs. I think one of the things that you're going to have to pay strict attention to with your prompt is the idea of being sustainable, being efficient, and inclusive, because much of the automation that goes on actually reduces the personnel count, and that's actually what funds it. So pay special attention when you're thinking about these things, about how you can meet all those requirements as opposed to just some of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coppola, for that introduction about what you do. Next, Philip will be doing the introduction.
Okay, next you'll be hearing from Sean Han, an automotive designer. Mr. Han, could you please share your experience in the in automobile design strategy?
Yeah, sure. Hello, my name is Sean Han. Hello, Phillips, and hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I am an automotive designer in the industry, close to 10 years right now. I do specialty in interior design. My job is focused on to definitely make the product pretty, attractive. But on the other side, I do focus to make it very safe, but also let the customer experience be very smooth and efficient for everybody. So that's a short sentence to just let me know what I'm doing. But thank you very much. I hope my knowledge with everybody else can help you guys guide or give you feedback to the right direction. But thank you.
Basically, I think somebody like Sean makes the outside of the car look pretty, and people like me make the stuff inside that may not be as pretty, but at least it gets it from A to B.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but
It's a good
Sean,
team right
people
now,
like
so-
Sean know science and art. Cavemen like me just know how the metal looks. It may just be, but it works.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Han, for that introduction. Next, Max will be doing the introduction.
Tim Dwyer, Pepperditch Farm Shipping and Inventory Manager. Mr. Dwyer, can you please share your expertise in the shipping and inventory?
Thank you, Max, for the introduction. With what I do with Pepperidge Farm is I ensure that the inventory is at the store level so the consumers can come pick up the product and purchase it. With what I do, it's all about time and efficiency. So you have to work not only hard, but smart. And by going to work and having a good work ethic and going in every day and not playing around in the actual account is how you can grow the sales and actually produce and get more product out there in front of the consumers. With the products that I handle, you guys are probably familiar with them. The goldfish crackers, the Milano cookies, and such items. You actually have live people every day bringing that stuff into your local grocery stores, into your local independent accounts, putting the stuff on the shelf for you to purchase. So with everything that I do, it's about managing every aspect of my day so that I can get through to the most accounts as possible to be the most profitable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dewar, for that introduction about what you do. Next, Philip will be doing the introduction.
Now you'll be hearing from Carl Zimmer, railroad and shipping transportation expert. Mr. Zimmer, could you please share your experience in railroad and shipping transportation?
Okay, I don't think he's here right now, but if he ever joins the Zoom back, we could come back to him. So we will start with some questions that we received in advance from various teams, and then we'll open up the chat for teams to ask live questions. Phil, would you like to start the first question?
Yeah, sure. So the question one, how do you design a vehicle so that it's safe and able to protect everything inside, including the driver and the cargo? This question was intended for Mr. Han, but anyone else can answer it.
Oh, yeah, sure. I can definitely try to answer that. If you talk about the safety and protecting cargo or the person inside, I think you can definitely look into two perspectives. Like during the experience when you're driving it, or when you're really in a car accident, or when you're in trouble with it. So I think definitely that two aspects has to be looked into. First of all, I'll definitely try to divide the cargo area with the driver. That as example that you can see a lot of transportation trucks or even moving companies that you can see that happening right now. But also in my industry, we even try to think about how to design the parts and the inside to protect the people. We try to not make things sharp. We try to think about when it's a rolling condition to not hurt the people or not even hurt the cargo that you're going through. So definitely protecting the person is one of the priority, but also I think that when you protect the cargo, I think that when you're moving around, you don't want the cargo to sway around the truck or the transportation. So I'll definitely think what method that you can actually lock it in. Do you want a modular concept to place different size of cargoes or in different ways? So I think there's definitely two aspects, but I think that can be a quick overview that how you guys can actually look into to see how to protect the people and the cargo, but also in different accidents, how you do that separately also.
Mhm.
Yep. But please let me know if there's any additional on it, but I think that can give a quick overview on what I think about that.
Mhm. And it works not just for cars; it goes to planes and such too. A good
Yeah, of
example,
course.
if you folks see those commercials with the crash test dummies and such, or when the car hits the wall or another car, right? The body folds. Not everything folds. Same as in a plane crash. What tends to be left over that doesn't smush when it crashes? The engine and transmission, the big metal parts. So one of the things you do when you're safety engineering systems, you look at those commercials when it crushes. Somebody like Sean sits with people who engineer also the metal in the body and says, okay, if the car is going to crash, let it fold so that the part around the humans and then the precious cargo kind of folds and protects around them. The hard part is like my engines and transmissions, an engine doesn't fold, right? So we have to make sure that when you have that crash, the heavy metal parts stay out of the way. Here's your car, it hits the wall, the rest of the car keeps going. Human being, you don't want it to crush. You don't want the big stiff metal engine to hit the person. So somebody like Sean and somebody myself get together and say, if it's going to crunch, we make sure that it crunches and cushions as much as possible the humans and the cargo one direction, and all the metal that's not going to smush, it goes away from the people. So that's a way that you say, okay, different people with different backgrounds get together and use their knowledge of science and also the art. You don't want an entire car to look just like a big airbag. It has to actually look kind of nice or people won't buy it. You get together and use your art and your science and your training, and you plan forward and say, how will this work? Not just when things are going good, but when things are going bad. Same as an airplane. You could put the jet engine in front of the passengers. You just don't necessarily want that if there's a problem. So in any kind of science field and any kind of engineering, you think, okay, who's going to use this thing? What's going to be around it? And even if there are people who don't buy it, other people, how might they be affected? Somebody like Sean and myself also have to say, it's not just the people inside the car. We have to make sure if a pedestrian, if someone walking their dog or walking to school gets hit by the car, can the car be safe? Can the car kind of cushion when they get hit so their head doesn't hit this engine block, let's say? So that's one way that safety and all those things get kind of tied together.
I'd just like to pop in with one other idea, and that is the social engineering that goes into car crashes. In my younger days, I spent about 16 years riding on an ambulance unit. And luckily, this was a long time ago for you guys, because I can personally tell you that drunk driving used to be much more prevalent than it was now. And it was against the law, and none of that worked. And I used to, riding on the ambulance unit, almost every night I was on, find myself in an upside down car. I used to ride on Friday nights, and we would find ourselves in cars wrapped around trees and upside down cars all the time. And then a group called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, picked up the idea that drunk driving was bad and made a social campaign to get people to stop getting into their cars drunk. They made it very, very uncool. And that alone had a tremendous effect in a space of a year or two. The change in the number of car accidents that I saw in Montclair, so no highways, was dramatic. So I want to think of the social engineering as well as the hard engineering.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Han, Burhan, and Koplo. I have a question. So, can you expand on the connection between automation and loss of jobs, and how you can solve problems without making new problems?
This is for Mr. Hoban, but anyone else can anyone else can answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah,
Could you?
okay.
Sorry.
Can you expand on the connection between automation and loss of jobs, and how you solve problems without making new problems?
A lot of times you make new problems when you solve old problems, that's for sure. Automation will replace people, especially on a production line. Most of the jobs you're replacing, though, are of a repetitive nature, jobs that most people really don't want to do. So the automation is much more efficient for the process, and you can take people and get them better jobs. If you can retrain them, you can get them better jobs to do, not just packing jars into boxes by hand, or palletizing cartons onto a pallet and shrink wrapping it by hand. That's kind of old school thinking that has to go away in this economic environment to make the product more efficient and more profitable. But the problem that brings us to is now you need more technical advanced people to maintain and run that equipment. So you've created jobs at the same time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And now I'm pretty sure Max has it.
I have to jump on another call. I'm sorry to leave, but thank you for inviting me.
Thank
Thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you, Mr. Hawks. I think the next question is for Kristen Kim. Can you expand the definition of inclusivity and efficient packaging and sorting?
All right, the question was, this is for Mr. Dewar. Is there a difference between fresh foods and products when storing and delivering?
Yes, there is a big difference between fresh foods and packaged goods. All fresh food has to be handled completely different and with a lot more care than with the regular packaged products. So if you were in the produce department of your grocery store and you see the people working there, they have to handle that product safer in the effects that they have to worry about the cleanliness of themselves along with the cleanliness of the products being put out. Now, if you go to the grocery store and you see the meat department and the seafood department, all those people are going to be wearing gloves, hairnets, aprons to ensure that they're as clean as possible handling the products raw before you guys are going to cook them. But then if you go to the other side of the store where you go to the cookie aisle, the cracker aisle, the salty snacks, the dairy departments, all that stuff is prepackaged by the manufacturer. So that even though there's less care involved by merchandising it, you also need to understand that that product was probably handled with people with bare hands. So when you're bringing it home before you consume it, you know, not just because of the pandemic and making sure everything is clean, but it is a good suggestion just to wipe the products down because you don't know how long the people it's been sitting on the shelf and you don't know who else has touched that and put it back. So, you know, with the safety for the prepared food, the prepared products by the manufacturer, there still is a chance of recall. There's still a chance that anything can still be contaminated prior to you even receiving the product at the store. But due to all the regulations and everything that we have to handle with food safety classes, we know what we're doing to avoid that problem so you don't have it at the grocery store level.
Thank you, Mr. Duar. And Philip has our next question.
Uh,
We'll answer the question I skipped over earlier. The one about the Kristen, the one that Kristen said through the thing. I think this isn't really for a specific person. It says, can you expand on the definition of inclusivity in efficient packaging and sorting? And I think anyone can answer this.
Talk to the job aspect when it was also raised, when you have new developments, how does it affect people? In manufacturing, one thing you do for inclusivity is something called human factors. So for example, if you have a factory, and you know, car factories are pretty huge, and the companies that make parts that go into cars, they're huge too. So we have thousands of people working on it. When we have thousands of people, you have men and women, you have different sizes, different heights. One of the things we do is we say, okay, from the 5th percentile, smallest average woman's height. So if you take the average height of women in the United States, or really any country, but in the US, it's usually based on US numbers. If you take 100 women on average, you take the 5th percentage smallest to men, the 95% tallest, and hand size and so forth. And you say, you know, so that they can work easy, they don't get hurt, their tools work for them. You want to make sure that that wide range of people are included. I want to make sure that if you're putting together something, and if the tools are safe for you, that very small people to very large people can use them. And it's not that all men are taller than women or not, but you try and say, okay, math-wise, how might I cover a lot of people? And then you also do things to say, hey, you're going to have people who aren't of all the same physical capability. Somebody who has a back injury, why should they not be able to work? So you try and look at those things when you're actually making these goods. So that's at least on the making side of things, how inclusivity comes into play. That's one example, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's we could all sugarcoat this a little bit, but in sorting and I'm sorry, what was the other sorting and
It was in distributing efficient packaging and sorting.
packaging and sorting? So I mean, in warehousing, the reality is that a lot of what's going on is sorting and packing, and more of that is being done by machines. So it's not that that there should be any limitation on inclusivity on anyone doing any given job, but the reality is that large scale sorting systems and large scale packaging systems are actually removing large numbers of people from the workforce. So again, the challenge you're faced with has to really, think about those things. And maybe there's a different way you can come up with, put fresh eyes on it, right? But typically my experience is that the more automation, the more efficiency. And when we look back at COVID over the last year, one of the other things you're tasked with is sustainability. One of the things that hurt companies dramatically was staffing, right? And again, the fewer people in the process actually makes you more COVID resistant, right? More resistant to the next pandemic of whatever it is. So it's a difficult problem, and it's a real challenge. As wages rise, all of this stuff pushes the needle and the economic balance towards more automation. And so that's a hard fact that has to be looked at.
Okay, so this will be the last question for a week that was submitted, and after this we will start answering the Q&A questions. So this one's for Mr. Koplo, for what anyone can answer. How can we make the warehouse more efficient by using technology? Should we use like apps?
Well, data is really important. When we look at information, we're now at the point where it's routine to track packages from the Far East when they go on a container to when they arrive at a warehouse, everything that's in that single box, and then as it's packed and sending it out to the retailer or the consumer or the final destination, information through that and software and apps are all helpful. But beyond that, really the efficiencies come from automation, and that's in many types. There's certain jobs that only humans do well, but there's many jobs that robots can do. Automated conveyor systems. There's a myriad of things that can happen that will make a warehouse more efficient, be able to move much more product. And again, automation systems, whether they're robots that actually travel around. Some companies are using robots. Well, Amazon's using robots that bring product to pickers to pack boxes. But there's many companies using robots that drive around between people who pick goods and people who pack orders, and they do all the legwork. So somebody may go to a station and stay there all day, but robots are running around scurrying around the warehouse with all the product. So there's many different ways. Information is great. Apps are great. Communication between companies is very important, but most of it's actually becoming physical these days in the warehouse.
Okay, so we will now move on to the Q&A sessions. So we have 21 questions in the Q&A section. I don't know if we should do these live, or you want to type. We could probably answer some live and some as typing. So I'll use the first question on the top. How much it's anonymous attendee, they asked how much plastic packaging is used per day?
Richard,
I mean, I guess I can jump in on some of that. So in apparel, many of the garments that travel in what are called poly bags, which is plastic. It's actually very dense plastic, and radio waves don't even go through it very well. It's serious stuff. But there's a tremendous amount of plastic that is used as wrapping, inner wrapping, and in food, there's endless plastic that's being used, whether it's to package the food or whether it's to package ice packs that go with the food, things like that. What you see on the outside tends to be corrugated cardboard, but most of you know from opening boxes that arrive, the first thing you typically hit inside that cardboard box is plastic. So lots of it.
I don't know if it's Richard or Tim used the word dunnage before, or pallets. So when basically in factories, there's boxes and stuff. And just like something goes to the store, it's wrapped in plastic a lot of times. One thing that people have tried to do, both for the environment, but also for cost. If I have 100,000 parts a day in a factory and they each have a plastic bag, that's a lot of waste, but that's also a lot of money. Who wants to spend that? So a lot of big companies have done their best. And I will say, when I started, the auto industry was not that good at this. They're a lot better. And I will give Ford credit. They've been pretty good at it. We reduced very strongly all the plastic waste that we have, and other things are renewable, recyclable, and such. Even 100 years ago, they used to actually grow a lot of their own stuff, so that there weren't things you were throwing out. And even back in the day, there were things that could be recyclable, wood chips or other stuff. Now we try really, really hard to have no throwaway stuff in the plant. And if it is quote unquote throwaway, you can just put it in a recycling bin and it's used right away with little energy, little water, little carbon, so forth. But it's like anything. If you plan well, you can be efficient from a greenhouse gas, from a, who's using energy standpoint, who's using petroleum and such. You can be efficient from a time standpoint. If you have 100,000 parts, who wants to spend 1 minute a day ripping apart bags? That's 100,000 minutes. No one wants to do that. And just space. If you have 100,000 bags in a factory, it has to go someplace. So if you plan these things out and you see experts in assembly and packaging and transportation, you can plan down your waste in all those areas. So it saves you time, money, energy, and environmental damage. And that's really useful in any field. It's not just automotive. We just happen to be so big. Aircraft companies can do the same. But pound for pound, it just takes planning. It doesn't mean you can get rid of every single bit of waste, but you can get rid of a lot. It is far better now than when I came out of school and saw it. Because I'll be honest, I used to be horrified by some of the things I used to see. We're a lot better now, if for no other reason, no one wants to spend the rest of the money. But also a lot of people realize, look, if you're in a state like New Jersey that used to have a lot of pollution, if you're in a state like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, that's all factories and quote unquote Rust Belt, as Newark and Trenton and the Bronx and all these other places will be, you kind of want your water to be good. Flint, Michigan is not the only place with bad water. Those things come from factories. Those things come from bad pipes. Those things come from things that with planning you can prevent. So more people are realizing the waste and the garbage isn't just over there. It's in your water. It's in your kids' water. If you plan things right, you can prevent that and save a lot of money early on. If you don't plan things right, you have more problems. So companies are getting smarter, if for no other reason than just to save a penny. But also people are realizing, like Richard said, it's generational change, drunk driving, other things. Sometimes society realizes, you know what, this isn't too smart what we're doing. And by the way, our kids are going to have to deal with it. And when they become adults, they're kids. So we are getting a bit smarter in big industries about, let's not pollute this stuff and let's not waste the money. So that's I guess one positive about modern business and industry. There's still a lot of problems out there, but that is one thing that's gotten better.
I know with Pepperidge Farm that we strive to use only recyclable products to ship everything in. We actually all deal with nothing but corrugated cardboard versus a lot of these other companies who will use plastic, which is non-recyclable, obviously. But with all of our packaging, the company has made strides to do so. And Pepperidge Farm is actually owned by Campbell's. And Campbell's has done the same thing to the rest of the other divisions that they have. So they're now using more recycled products to get the product to the consumer. So, with everything that we've attempted to do, with the shipping aspect of it, we're trying to eliminate fuel costs and stuff like that just to be more profitable and efficient. But we are also keeping in mind that, cardboard versus plastic, cardboard can be used 10, 15, 20, 30 times. And, all the stores actually get money back for the cardboard that's being recycled so that they can continue to have less waste.
I'll give you a good food example. At Ford, at my lunchroom, our plastic, there's different types of plastics without going into the chemistry of it, but there's plastics that are not easily recyclable, like Mr. Dewar mentioned, there's ones that are a bit more recyclable. Our plastic forks and knives don't get thrown out, they get recycled and become part of your steering wheel, becomes part of your instrument panel and so forth. There's old jeans that become part of the stuffing that goes in your car seat. So we even grow some plants on our sites that make their way into the vehicle material. And that used to be done 100 years ago. So we're getting back to that. So a lot of those things with the planning can be done. If you don't plan, problem. But there's actually some pretty smart ways to reuse and use less and recycle. Any one of those three are good. If you can add those three together in any industry, you're doing a lot better.
Okay. The next question is for Mr. Coppola. How long have you worked in the software development industry?
About, let's see, 40 something years. Again, I started doing some basic stuff, but I started with neckties and warehousing on systems that don't even exist today. And I still actually earn a lot of money with some obsolete languages that are horrible to program in, but there's a lot of existing software. And so I've seen a lot of changes. When I was your age, PCs didn't exist, and we got our start typically by going into the city and seeing demo single board computers that you would actually have to, in order to boot them up, you would have to key in 23 sets of binary numbers to create what was called a bootstrap. And you would key them in by hand. And if you made a mistake, you had to turn the machine off, turn it back on, start over. It was kind of.
Yeah, it says what kind of adjustments or improvements have been made to increase the comfort of drivers that drive for a long time. So I think that's kind of asking like what improvements have you experienced over your career as a truck driver, and maybe what areas do you think still need to be improved?
Okay, what you have to do, you have to train to learn how to drive for a long period of time. In the training process, you're supposed to every 2 hours, if you're driving long distance, every 2 hours, take a break, walk, or you're supposed to take a 30-minute break per every 8 hours. But it's suggested to take 2 hours, every 2 hours, check your load and stretch. And that's been conducted over the years. As far as the truck goes, some trucks have better suspension and air ride than other trucks. Some trucks got just regular air shock, regular shock ride, but a lot of newer trucks got better air ride, and which is a very comfort for the driver.
Did that answer the question? Did you hear that? Yeah. Any other questions for Tony while we have him on the phone?
I'm curious. This is Dr. Brown, by the way. I'm just curious if in any ways the roadways have changed in your career, Mr. Rainey. How long have you been driving, and are the roadways that sort of you're using to go from state to state, have they changed over time?
Glad you asked that question. A very good question. The roadway, I've been driving since '98, and the roadways hasn't changed, and I don't think they will change. But for the most part, most people who drive, there are signs that give you all the direction and information you need. You just don't read them because you don't need them. Truck drivers are trained to read every sign because it's directional and it's informative. To give you an example of what I'm saying, when you talk about interstate, for example, okay, interstate means exactly what it says. You entering a state. If you on highway, interstate 95, your odd numbers, okay, goes north and south. Okay? Your even numbers go east and west, and that's an interstate in the United States. To give an example of what I'm saying, if you on 95 going north and you are in Virginia, if you keep going north, it'll carry you 95 north to Baltimore, on up into New York, on up into Connecticut. Further that north will go. If you're going south and you're Virginia, it'll carry right on through North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, North. It don't change. Now, that's north and south. But if you're going east and west, those interstate numbers will be even. For example, 40, 80, all even numbers. If you're going into a state, I'm using states that you're probably familiar with. If you're going into a state, like if you're going into, say, Jersey, okay, and you on 95, right? Now, if the number in front of 95, we're talking interstates now, that's the one with the blue and the red sign. If you're going, it was a number in front of it, like an even number in front of 95, like 695. That means that road is going around the city. If it's an odd number, like 395, that means it's going straight through the city. And that's what truckers use, that information. We learn it, so it becomes second nature. But it's posted on every highway that you go on, every interstate. And I mix them up, interstate and highway. Highways are different from interstates because the highways are called United States. The U.S. means United States highway. Interstate means it doesn't matter what state you're going in, it don't change.
So, Mr. Rainey, over your time, in terms of the conditions of the roadways, the bridges, America's highways are sort of one of the things, our infrastructure is one of the things that distinguishes us among many things. But have you seen any changes, to the conditions of the highways. In other words, do you feel that it's an infrastructure that has been I don't know, updated, protected?
In different states, yes, and some states, no. Just like the further north you go, the roads are not as protected or conditioned, and largely because it's so heavily traveled. They don't have time to repair those roads. From probably Washington D.C. on up, the roads are a lot treacherous down from D.C. down.
So how does that impact your ability to deliver? You do long haul. You've done long hauls. If you explain what that is, and then you're now doing state to state hauls.
Right. Well, actually, most people who, especially the people who really run the north corridor, largely are people who are from that area. The people from my area avoid it at all possibilities because of traffic and the roads. Because the road conditions are not that great. Because you got potholes, you got those bridges that've got those ruts in them, and you got heavy traffic. So and it's a lot more. You have to be a lot more focused on what you're doing when you're going up in the northern corridor. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but the roads there, they're doing better with the bridges. But as far as the asphalt and making it that visible, it's not as good there as it is in the southern area.
Mr. Rainey, this is Mike from Ford. We have a word for that around here. It's called Detroit. So as he's mentioning, roads are bad in the north because not just because it's cold, it's actually worse when things get hot and cold. Ice gets in, expands, contracts, expands, contracts. In the heavily industrialized regions in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, you have two problems. One, there's a lot of trucks. It doesn't mean that when you have trucks in of itself, it's worse than cars. It's how much weight per tire. If you have a bunch of area of a tire, if I have 1,000 pounds over 10 square inches and 100 pounds over one, it's the same thing. The problem becomes how many of them, right? If you got hundreds of factories like we have here and you have lots of trucks coming, but nobody fixes them, it's a problem. When I moved from New York and the roads we have, I thought, I'm coming to car country. It must be beautiful. The roads, this is before all of you young people's time, but the roads in this region look like the Bronx in the 70s. And when you hear all the talk we say about infrastructure in the US, that's a big jobs problem, because what happens if you can't even move things easily in good weather, let alone bad weather? I had to get up to the airport the other night from my house to Detroit airport, and a truck had hit the bridge. You would think in a region with hundreds of thousands of trucks, our bridges would be a little taller than the average truck. Doesn't always happen. So I had to get rerouted through the farm country. In countries that have expanded their roads, whether it's human drivers or now you hear a lot about autonomous and apps and all these things that make smart driving. Well, drivers are pretty smart. Mr. Rainey, I'm sure, knows more than any computer will tell you about where the roads are and what to do with them. But it's a system. You have to make sure that when you build things, you keep up the maintenance of them. It's one thing if I'm stuck where my 1 hour drive becomes 2.5 hours. It's a different thing that people like Mr. Rainey have accidents with vehicles that weigh tens of thousands of pounds. And so that's a big issue. New technology helps because you can predict where the weather is. You can see where the potholes are. The computer and the radar and the laser can see the road quality better than your eyes can necessarily right away. But particularly for cargo and transportation all across the US, very much so in the north, but really everywhere, We need smart young people like you all who are asking these questions to say, okay, what do we hear from the Mr. Hans and myself and Mr. Coppola, and Mr. Doerr and Mr. Rainey? What solutions can you guys and gals at this young age figure out where to go? And how to deal not just with how you make the things that go on the road, how you make the things that come out of factories, but as Mr. Coppola said, how does society plan around these things? I can make the world's safest car. If you get in it and you're only looking at your phone, or somebody gets drunk, you're going to have an accident. I can't make the world's perfect car if a very imperfect driver gets in and is dangerous. You can make the world's safest car. You can only do so much if the road collapses underneath it. And so you have to think, when you're developing things, not just who are the end customers who's buying something, who are the end users who are affected by these things, who's affected by the work, who's trained to do these things, who's keeping up the roads if we're making things in cargo that we can make the best trucks, we can make the best robots and the best workers in the plants to get these things out. If the roads are stuck, what do we do? So these are these things that, quote unquote, economics, who deals with where the money goes to fix these things, who plans for these things, they all come together. And it's good for you young people to be asking these questions now, because in a couple of years, you'll be the decision makers governing what people like us deal with and have to work around.
I agree with what you're saying. Also, my concept is this as well. We as truck drivers are trained, and not only to operate a big rig on the highway, we also are trained to be defensive drivers. However, the people who drive what we call the four wheels, the regular car drivers, they're not trained. They're not trained in what we're trained on. They don't know that it takes 300 feet for a truck to stop. And therefore, what happens is they take chances. They don't know how much weight you got on the back of that truck, because they thinking you can stop like they can stop, and you can't. So that's why they take those risks of pulling in, because you big, they can't see around you. They go around you because they think if you're going slow and you can't go no fast, you might be doing it because there's another vehicle in front of you, or there is a gap between you, which is a safe stopping distance for you. They go in front of you, and then when they get in front of you, they see what's going on. Now they got to hit brakes, and then you right behind them.
Yeah.
That should be some education that needed to be taught to the average driver. Because that would help prevent a lot of these accidents. Because a lot of it is because and I'm not taking nothing from the truck drivers, because some truck drivers take advantage of that truck because they think they can make that truck do anything, and they can't. But the majority is that everybody, these other trucks, that's why the people in the South try to stay in the South. Because when you hit north, the traffic is so crazy. And you have to be defensive on your end and be defensive on the other person. I could show you, if I could just tell you stories about how cars would pass me on the side of the road. I'm going on 95 and they come around the right side. I'm in the right lane. And they take their chances. I've seen them where they shoot right across from the fourth lane all the way across to the first lane just to take an exit. And most of the time, if there is an accident, they blame the truck driver. Simply because of the insurance that we have to carry. And that anytime a truck hits a car, it's the truck driver's fault. So the road conditions is important, yes. This condition is equally important. But there's no information going out to the average driver dealing with a truck. When I talk to people that never been in a truck and I explain to them how long it takes to stop, and that's at 45. When I tell them to don't ride beside the truck, they never knew. information that they're not aware of. And that's why they take the chances that they take, because they don't know any better. And we're talking about life and death.
Yeah. One of you students asked about apps and safety, and you'll see a lot of commercials now where they say, hey, if you're a smart driver, plug your phone in and the GPS in your phone will see if you're driving aggressive, if you're literally on your phone texting when you should be just driving. I have that on for my car for cheaper insurance and such. As a car person, as the father of a young driver, as somebody, I drive, before COVID, I was driving 30 to 36,000 miles a year. I will take 100 trucks and semis in front of me against 20 regular drivers who are just driving without a lot of discipline and safety and care for other people. So technology can help. Mr. Rainey will tell you a lot of truckers now, the company, and for insurance and other purposes and scheduling, it tracks how the drivers are driving. But these people make their living by making sure they get from A to B and the cargo gets from A to B, and they want to get home and safe from A to B. The average person isn't necessarily thinking about that as much. So there is technology that can help that. The new cars and the radar between cars, it sees it better. The brakes are a lot better. It can determine whether it's rainy, snowy, and so forth. There's a lot of new technology coming on board, and new things that you young folks who grow up with smartphones and apps and computers all around you, even more than my generation, can help build. But it has to be applied.
I'm in your generation.
These young kids blow past us.
I'm in your generation. I understand what you're saying. The technology, and I'll be honest with you, that technology with the camera in the GPS and the camera in the truck is doing more than seeing what they covering their hind parts. Because if it shows an accident, then they can look at that and see what caused it. And so it helps out both ways. But in my opinion, what I would suggest that what technology would really help out, and I think of it cost effectively, and that is if any individual getting a license or renewing a driver's license have a small video of what a truck is capable of doing, what kind of damage a truck could do, a truck that's been in this accident. For example, a lot of people don't realize when a truck makes a right turn or a left turn, they got to go wide out to make the turn. Well, a lot of people think that when he's going out wide, they can shoot the gap. If the driver of that truck is not watching what the person behind them doing, what's going to happen? He makes his wide turn, boom, he's gonna hit that car, because the car thinking he's going another direction. If that small information like that would help, if technology, and it's small technology, it's what it is giving out information to the people who do not operate trucks, because you're on that road together.
Okay, so I have a question. It's it's for everybody. So, what problems do you face, like regarding health and safety when you're in your job?
That's probably your question again. You said what? Say that again.
Oh, I think that she's actually, asking for all of for if anybody had an answer about any health and safety issues that impact, because we just heard from you about the risks of other drivers, and we also have on this call some people who work with manufacturing and things like that. So I think she's asking about what are some of the other health and safety issues that impact anything along the cargo train, anything along the cargo line from start to finish.
Yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of truckers haul what they call hazardous material. Okay, and that is a safety hazard. You really need to know what are your limitations on when you haul it hazardous material. Oftentimes it's in small quantities so that it's not such a big thing. But then sometimes there are large quantities, and you have to be very familiar with the hazardous material that you be hauling. Then trucks are hauling, but cargo trains are hauling, but planes don't haul. They don't haul hazardous material, and it's safe. It's a safe a safety issue, and it could be hazardous.
Yeah. What about Mr. Coppola or Mr. Dewar or Mr. Hahn? Are there any safety issues? Because you're in kind of a different area. Are there any health and safety issues that you have to think about in your lines of work?
Well, yeah, I've been really lucky because as a software developer, I can do that remotely. So I'm personally in a very good situation. Unfortunately, for the warehouse workers in the warehouses I deal with, it's the exact opposite. Most of those workers had a very tough time. And I actually deal with some warehouses that actually had closures because they had COVID outbreaks. Even with, in the early days, even with taking temperatures and masking, it was very difficult. I spent 2 days in a warehouse since COVID started, and only 2 days. And I was masked the whole time, temperature checks. Actually, a lot of the times in the early days, everyone was wearing gloves as well. I wasn't picking any product. And I have to tell you that wearing a mask all day in a warehousing environment is very difficult. It's very stressing just breathing. So for many of the workers, this was a big problem. So it leads to a few things. It leads to staffing shortage. It led to some of the warehouses having shutdowns a week at a time. And in one of those cases, the warehouse was a food warehouse. So that just causes a tremendous ripple effect because you have the warehouse having to get shut down, then the food doesn't get out, then the shelves, the food's not going out so that the shelves can't get stocked, et cetera. This is a big problem.
I know through all the pandemic, I never stopped working. Safety was my major concern. And I know that between washing my hands, sanitizing my clothes, sanitizing my vehicles, I was very proactive to not bring anything home with me. As far as manufacturing went, our plants had multiple shutdowns. If one person tested positive, they they had to have 3 consecutive um, negative tests before you could return to work if you were exposed to this person. Um, as far as wearing a mask, I still to this day wear it out there all the time while working, just because to me this is a fear of what could potentially happen to me if I did contract anything. But when it's a hot, humid day outside, 95 degrees, in the middle of August, it is not comfortable wearing these masks. But, you know, I wore it for safety. I know our manufacturing plants, it's mandatory. Everybody gets temperature checked. Everybody has to take COVID tests. I can't tell you the amount of COVID tests I've taken over the past year and a half, 2 years. Um, but, you know, through the proper protocol and through cleanliness, you can survive this without being affected. But I know, I know Campbell's, we took it very seriously to where if we had one person contract it, everybody around them was sent home, like I said, until I got tested 3 times. And sometimes they would shut down an entire manufacturing plant. If there was 3 employees that contracted it, they shut down the entire manufacturing plant and did like a 2-week, cleanse of everything, and everything that was produced in that plant was actually destroyed for fear that they could have been contaminated.
Okay, so
I don't have that problem because I haul lumber now, and my contacts are kind of like not in a group setting. I usually deal with one or two individuals from my one point to the next point. Then if I go inside to the office, I wear my mask. So when COVID hit, my job became in a demand. It's kind of funny the way it worked out, because us truck drivers felt like we was unappreciated until you can't get the product. But then when it's made known, well, you need these truckers to get the products out, then all of a sudden we in high demand. And so now my job increased because of COVID.
Thank you. I think Jason has one final question for everybody.
yes, this will be the last question, and everyone should answer this. We'll start with Mr. Han. What do you think is the biggest problem facing your area of cargo and transportation?
That is a big question, Jason. The huge problem on transportation and cargo, I definitely think it is safety. Also, with the new technology, as the industry is heading to electric vehicles and a lot of big displays coming into the market, even in vehicles, I think it's definitely safety. So as my job is more focused in automotive design, as I brought in the early time, I think it will be how to make safety a priority for the customer, for the driver in transportation, but also definitely cargo. And one experience I just had, I recently, like a year ago, designed actually a transportation, like a cargo truck on it. It was very fun, and also I did had an experience going into a pre-production vehicle on it. But that was one of the focus we are doing, like trying to make the customer safe, but also try to make the cargo safe as we go. So I hope that answered your question, but I think it's basically more on the safety, because everybody wants to go to point A to B. But I think the big question is how to get there more efficiently, how to get there more safely also.
Okay, Mr. Burhan, could you answer the question next?
One of the things that we've been focused on, you'll hear automotive companies use the phrase mobility a lot. The challenge is not just the A to B and doing it safely. We're trying to do that more, but it's also how do you do that in a world where you now have these megacities. You have so much of the world. I believe we're more than 50% of human population is in urban centers around the world. How do you cross? How does an ambulance get from a hospital to the patient and bring them back in a Midtown Manhattan, in a Newark, in a Philly? How do you do that in a Beijing? I've been in developing countries, and you're in countries where you would think it's pretty poor, and it generally is, but you go to the capital where everyone is living now because they leave the farms, just like people left the farms in the United States 100 years ago, and they're all congested in the cities. How do you cross Lagos? How do you cross Hanoi? How do you cross these cities? And so now we're trying to coordinate where automobiles and scooters and connected apps to tell you where your next point of transport is, and the Ubers and the Lyfts and the chariots, there's form a system of transportation. How do you get it so all the lights go green when an ambulance is coming, and only green, everyone else stops? how do you do those things? That's one of the biggest challenges. So now we're all going with anything from autonomous vehicles where they can drive themselves if you're in it, to connected vehicles where all the drivers in the cars can at least know where they're going. The street light says one direction goes, everyone goes. To where there's safety in volume. Again, if there's a situation where the city needs a lot of firefighters, a lot of cops, a lot of ambulances to go to a given direction, how does the system do that? And not just, again, in a big city, in a rich country like the United States, not just New York, Chicago, or so forth. How do you do that in countries that don't have necessarily as much money, but their cities are as huge as our cities, and they're trying to grow as well. So that's a constant theme, and it's the mobility of getting people in cargo and needs and medicine and everything else from A to B. And safety is not just speed. If you have no speed, that's a safety risk too. If that ambulance can't move through traffic, that is a major safety problem. If firefighters can't move through traffic, that is a major safety problem. So we're all trying to address that in a kind of a holistic sense. And again, that's where you young folks who are asking all these smart questions and who come from a super connected world, you're online with people from Cairo, Hanoi, from Paris, from everywhere instantly. So you're going better than we were in figuring out what are these issues globally and how to address them.
Okay, Mr. Rainey, could you go next?
I didn't hear you. Could I what?
Could you answer the question was, what is the number one problem with facing cargo and transport in like your area of cargo and transport?
Well, in this conversation, I hear a lot about the advancement of putting automated vehicles on the road. I do not see how that's going to work, because the human element of surprise will not be able to be in that truck. What I see with the car, we said the cargo and delivery. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, cargo and transport. So anything along the whole cargo line, from manufacturing to get it, basically, how does it get from the raw goods to people's homes, like anything along those lines?
Well, the improvement is safety, and I can't reiterate more than what I said before about the operation, because we all on the highway together, and we have to understand what a truck can do as opposed to what the car can do. Because what I experience is in this cargo transportation is a challenge, because the cars challenging trucks and the trucks is challenging cars, and you have to have the mentality to take when a person cuts you off. You have to take that and not let it get to you, because if you cut them off, they gonna flip you the bird. Now you got to have your attitude adjustment intact. A lot of accidents happen because of that aggressive driving. And the safety of the transport, the idea is to get the product from one place to the other place safe and timely. So what's happening, you got pressure coming from the shipper, you got pressure coming from the receiver, because they want it at this time. And you got traffic that you have to deal with, you got time frame you have to deal with. And it's frustrating. It can be frustrating. So what happens is you got truckers that's got attitude, you got drivers got attitude. In that transportation from one place to the other, you have to have that patience. The truck driver has to have that patience to keep a sound mind and attention on what they are doing.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next, Mr. Koplo, could you answer that question?
Sure. We're all looking for efficiency, and one of the things that's happened over a number of years, it's not a new idea, is a concept of just-in-time manufacturing, just-in-time warehousing, just-in-time retail, everything just in time. And this even actually relates to, what we just heard from Mr. Rainey. Just in time. Everybody's doing everything just in time. And what we've done is press the margins to be so thin that when you talk about sustainability and resilience, we've lost a lot of that. One of the biggest problems for people shipping goods is that there's 40 something ships that can't get unloaded outside the port of LA because everything is jam-packed and the ports are solid. We can't get the goods out of there. The margins have gotten a little thin, and this may be where you find your hook for how do we not just look for efficiencies, but look for efficiencies that are sustainable and maybe even inclusive, is maybe we need to widen those margins. So the thin margins of everything that's going on today makes us very vulnerable at every stage of the process. And I think that's really the biggest issue we're all going to face in the next, number of years.
Okay, thank you. And now, Mr. Dewar, could you answer that question?
Yes. One of my biggest concern is, since I do very local traveling, is I deal with a lot of drivers, especially during the commute times. Even though I do start my day very early, the first couple hours of my day, I can get a lot more accomplished before, the stores open and the commuting traffic happens. The way I design my route is so I avoid major traffic flow. So, where I am in Western Morris County, um, Morristown, Route 10, Route 80, Route 46. The way I design my route and the way I am going to service all my customers is I go opposite traffic flow so that the eastbound commute, I'm heading westbound. The southbound commute on like Route 206, I'm actually going southbound and everybody else is traveling northbound. So with me, I try and avoid people as much as possible. And there are a lot of people that are always in a rush to get where they have to go. Well, I always say if it's going to take you 15 minutes to get there, give yourself 20 so you don't have to run the red light or you're speeding up and down a local road. You're always better safe. You're always better getting there safe than getting there early. You can always start the drive 5 minutes early. You can't make up 5 minutes on a drive. So, to everybody out there who's going to soon be getting your driver's license, pay attention to that. And something that I think should be instituted with all of the vehicles in the upcoming future is there should be a docking system for cell phones. And the car should not be able to start until your cell phone is docked in there so that the driver cannot touch it. I think that's the biggest concern out there on the road is people looking away, texting, trying to make a phone call. It's just a safety issue for everybody out there. And I know as an adult, I don't always pertain to that also, but I make a concerted effort to not text, to not answer phone calls, to not do that stuff and call people back when I arrive at my destination.
So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming. And I want to thank everyone for Oh wait, yeah, we need to show the slide. I just want to thank everyone for coming. This has been really helpful for our innovation project. And we will definitely use your advice to use our innovation project to help other people and make sure the transportation and cargo industry becomes safer and more efficient. I mean, safe, efficient, sustainable, and easily accessible.
Right. Thank you so much. This presentation will be on YouTube. The